They didn't just disappear, they were removed, and the strangest part is the evidence they ever existed is still sitting in plain sight. I didn't start this expecting to find anything unusual. I was looking at a collection of late 19th century excavation photos from the American Midwest. Old, grainy images, railroad workers, shovels, mud, nothing remarkable, until I noticed what they were standing next to. A femur. Except it wasn't human-sized. It was longer than the man holding it. I zoomed in, then zoomed in again, and that's when the feeling started. The kind you get when something is wrong, but you can't yet say why. Because this wasn't an isolated image. There were dozens, different towns, different states, different years, same story, same bones. And then the articles, small local newspapers from the 1800s, fragile scans, on faded type, giant skeleton unearthed by farmers, bones of enormous man discovered during ploughing. An ancient burial mound reveals oversized remains. Over and over, Ohio, Wisconsin, West Virginia, Tennessee. Each report brief, matter-of-fact, no drama, no sensational tone, just normal reporting, as if this was something that simply happened. And then after the early 1900s, nothing. No follow-ups, no museum exhibits, no preserved remains, just silence. The bones were described, measured, sometimes even sketched, but they were never seen again. I kept digging, and what I found next made the silence louder. In 1883, the Smithsonian Institution was already the central authority for American archaeology, and dozens of these newspaper reports end the same way. The bones were sent to the Smithsonian for study. Again and again, sent, and studied, and then gone. No catalogue entries, no public records, no displays, as if they were absorbed into a place where things go to stop existing. That's when I found the first burial mound, or what used to be one. Across the Midwest, there are thousands of these ancient earthworks, huge geometric mounds, perfect circles, octagons, massive raised hills shaped by human hands. They predate recorded history in North America. When settlers arrived, many of them were still intact. Farmers plowed through them, railroads cut through them, towns built over them, and almost every time one was opened, large skeletons were found inside. Not slightly large, 7 feet, 8 feet, sometimes reportedly 9, buried with tools, ornaments, ceremonial objects, not monsters, people, buried intentionally, carefully, ritually. And contemporary accounts note that the skulls were unusually thick, the jawbones are massive, teeth intact and human, nothing mythical, just scaled up. And what's more unsettling is how casually this was treated. No panic, no disbelief, just curiosity. Measurements recorded, sketches made, then the remains were shipped off. By the early 1900s, over 2,000 burial mounds had been excavated in the Ohio Valley alone. Thousands of skeletons catalogued. But when modern archaeologists reference these sites today, the oversized remains are never mentioned. The mounds are discussed, the artifacts are discussed, the people are discussed, but not the bodies, as if the most physical evidence was edited out of the story. That's when I found the next piece, an 1897 newspaper from Nevada. Workers mining near Lovelock Cave broke into a chamber, and inside were mummified remains described as red-haired, over 7 feet tall, wrapped in woven material, with tools, baskets, and sandals far too large for an average human. Local accounts described the shock of seeing them, not because they looked monstrous, but because they looked human, just larger. The remains were reportedly studied. Some artifacts still exist in regional museums, but the bodies missing, listed as lost, misplaced, or discarded due to deterioration, which is strange because delicate baskets from the same site survived perfectly, but bones didn't. And then I noticed a pattern. The larger the skeleton described in the report, the less likely it was to exist in the present record. 5-foot remains preserved, 6-foot remains catalogued, 7-foot remains sent away, never seen again. I sat back from my screen and realized something unsettling. These discoveries weren't hidden, they were published, documented, shared openly, and then slowly forgotten. Not disproven, not explained, just removed from the narrative, like someone edited the margins of history. And what makes it harder to ignore is this. The mounds are real, the cave is real, the artifacts are real. You can visit these places, you can stand where the bones were found, but you can't see the bones. And that's when the question stopped being, did this happen? And became, why don't we talk about it? Because if even a fraction of these reports were accurate, it means something very simple. At some point in the past, people lived here who were much larger than us, and for reasons no record clearly explains, that fact was quietly set aside, not debated, not studied publicly, just erased, and the only thing left are old papers, old photos, and empty display cases where nothing is labeled. Which is when I realized this wasn't about giants, it was about disappearance. Because if physical evidence can vanish this easily, what else did? And that's where the next trail begins, in a place far older than America, where the same pattern appears again. I thought this was an American story, burial mounds, newspaper clippings, bones shipped off and never seen again, but the moment I started looking outside the United States, the pattern didn't just continue, it multiplied. The first place I looked was the Mediterranean, because if unusually large human remains had ever been recorded anywhere in antiquity, it would be there, and they were. Ancient Greek historians wrote about them almost casually. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described Spartans uncovering a coffin containing a skeleton 7 cubits long, placing the body well over 7 feet tall. Not a myth, not a legend, an excavation, a measurement, a reaction. The Spartans didn't celebrate it. They didn't worship it. They reburied it with respect and moved on. Then I found Pliny the Elder's writings from the 1st century CE, referencing unusually large human bones discovered after earthquakes and landslides exposed ancient graves. Again, no drama, just observation, as if encountering oversized skeletons was something that happened often enough to be worth noting. And then centuries later, the same thing happens again. In 1456, an earthquake struck near what is now Sicily, exposing what observers described as enormous human bones. Not monster bones, human bones. A large skull, human teeth, long limbs. Crowds gathered, the church ordered them removed, and then no further documentation appears to exist. The bones were not preserved, not displayed, not studied in any way we can trace today. I started noticing the same phrasing again and again. Bones removed, reburied, sent away, lost. The details changed, the outcome did not. So I went further, Northern Europe. In the 1700s, excavations in what is now France uncovered stone coffins far larger than a typical human body would require. Skeletal remains described as remarkably large in stature, measured, recorded, then transferred to academic institutions for study. But modern references never mention the size. The coffins are discussed, the burial practices are discussed, the bodies are not. And that's when something clicked. And this wasn't just about bones disappearing, it was about scale disappearing. The locations remained important, the structures remained significant, but the unusual physical evidence faded from the narrative. Then I reached Egypt, where scale itself feels wrong. Massive doorways, colossal stone blocks, statues towering over human height, explained as symbolic grandeur. But 1800s travel journals describe sarcophagi over 8 feet long, measured, sketched, carefully documented, and then never referenced again. Listed simply as large sarcophagus, no mention of why, no mention of what was inside. And the pattern became undeniable. Large burial spaces, reports of oversized remains, quiet removal from record, not through argument, but through absence. Then something felt different, a personal account. In 1911, near Catalina Island, when workers uncovered skeletons over 7 feet tall, red hair, double rows of teeth. Sent to a museum, studied for years, then vanished. No photographs, no records, only the article. It didn't read like folklore, it read like an accident, something ordinary people stumbled upon. And that's when it hit me. These weren't rare discoveries, they were common enough to be treated as normal. Which means physical evidence existed that didn't fit the modern narrative, and instead of rewriting the narrative, the evidence vanished. This isn't about giants as legends, it's about people, buried with care, studied, and then quietly removed from humanity's story. The buildings stayed, the mounds stayed, The cave stayed, the tombs stayed, only the bodies disappeared. This wasn't random loss, it was selective forgetting. Artifacts survive, tools survive, and pottery survives, but bones that didn't fit don't. And that leads to the most unsettling realization. If these remains were real and removed, then someone decided they didn't belong in history. The question isn't, did giants exist? It's who were they and why were they erased? I went back to the places because the people vanished, but the locations did not. You can stand there today, touch the stones, walk the earth, but you cannot see the people. History remembers structures, tools, cultures, but when it comes to the bodies, there is only absence. I searched archives, catalogues, collections, and found silence. Descriptions shortened, measurements removed, references ending with remains sent for study, with no conclusion. And the weight of this isn't giants, it's humanity. These were treated as human, buried with ceremony. I considered part of a community, and now they are not part of ours. No dramatic cover-up, just gradual erasure. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This applies to bones, to scale, to space. Earlier accounts describe bodies that fit the structures, bodies that are gone. People wrote what they saw, measured, touched, sent away, and never heard of again. If history is written from what remains, what happens when the most inconvenient remains don't? Without bodies, the story becomes cleaner, easier, more explainable. Only old words remain, easy to dismiss. But those words were written by people who believed they were recording something real. And maybe that's what stayed with me, not whether giants existed, but whether parts of the human story were simplified through forgetting. Now all that remains are empty places, where something once was, where bones were measured, and where today there is nothing to see. And the question that space leaves behind is quiet, persistent, unsettling. If the buildings remain and the people do not, what else from our past has been reduced to silence? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments.